I think the important parts are like prioritizing the things that really matter to you and cultivating your interests very deeply. You don't have to make a ton of money to live a wildly happy, fulfilled life, but you have to reach deep across those dimensions that really matter to you.
Hello and welcome to the rebelEducator podcast. My name is Hannah Frankman. I'm your host. And in today's episode, I'm speaking with Mitchell Earl, the COO of Praxis, a startup apprenticeship program that helps young people land their first job working in the professional world instead of getting a degree or going to business school. In today's episode, we talk about artificial intelligence and how it is breaking the college admissions process, and how educators should be adapting to prepare kids for an AI-driven world. We talk about the Praxis program and how it works and how it prepares recent high school graduates to go become professionals working full-time at startups. We talk about Mitchell's experience working with homeschoolers and some of the things he's noticed in the homeschoolers who apply for the Praxis program. And we talk about Mitchell's own education, especially his college education, and the ways in which it failed to prepare him for working in the professional world. I am very excited about this episode, and I hope you enjoy. How are things at Praxis?
Things are going well. Just continuing to keep on keeping on, and always just asking the questions like, how could we, make improvements? How can we do what we're doing already, but better? And it's, we're year 4 here of Cameron and I running the ship, and it's awesome now, like having that much time of being focused solely on this. It's like been thinking about this problem for a long time, have been working on the problem for a long time, but like a different level of skin in the game. And now being in that sort of capacity for, going on 4 years of like about as much skin in the game as you can have, working on a dedicated problem, and now like have the amount of time where you've been thinking about the same thing and working on the same problem for such an amount of time that you start to see the compound, like really start to see the compound returns and just the way you think about what it is you're trying to do. And that's not just limited to like the programming experience or sort of the ideas and philosophy of the business, but it's also like of running a business and thinking about what type of business you want to run, and also sort of like how all of what we're doing translates into like what we want to be doing for our own careers too. And I think that anytime you're starting something new, the first few months are tough. The first year is tough. The first couple of years are still tough. And it takes a while to get settled in and into a rhythm where your identity has become sort of second nature, that it's like, this is the problem I want to be focused on and working on. And it's not just of like, hey, there are other things, sort of the grass is always greener thing that always happens. I think when things are challenging, but it's more so like the longer you work on a problem, the easier it becomes to think on a much longer time horizon. And that's very hard the first few years, because you're just so much of what you're doing, you're learning in a new way for the first time. And it takes that developing a muscle memory that to get past, like there's a big learning curve right there, like trying to get back in the rhythm of that. And once you can begin to appreciate those gains, there's just a different level of clarity that you begin to experience. And that's really nice, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, but this is the longest I've worked on a single problem in my life now, and career. And like, about 3 years was the longest tenure I've had at multiple different things in the past. But now I'm in that next leg of the journey, and it's been really nice. So
that's awesome. We'll dig into Praxis in in a lot of detail later on in our call. I have a lot of questions for you. There's a few different topics that I want to hit with you here, but I want to start completely different topic. I've been having a lot of conversations with different people who are working in education about AI, and also like education. Twitter's been freaking out about it, both in good ways and in very bad ways. The old guard is very panicked. The kind of upstart innovators are very excited about it. I want to hear about your take on it, especially in the realm of college application essays, which is one of the first places that there's been a lot of panic about AI. People are freaking out because they don't know if an essay has been written by an actual human or by a robot, and everybody's freaking out about how to think about college essays now. What's your take?
Yeah, so I think I'll extend it beyond just college essays and just college writing in general. You know, the thing that one of the first things I thought about as OpenAI rolled out and this conversation around its application in education came out, as I was taken back to this time and place in my own school experience where things like Turnitin.com became this serious controversial issue where it's like, you now have to turn all your papers in through a specific portal that's going to check if you plagiarized. And there was this happened when I was in college, actually. And maybe it had already happened on other campuses, but on my campus, this transition period happened where there was this flip in dynamic where the assumption was students are probably plagiarizing, whether there's malicious intent or not. But it's like, we're now going to enforce everything has to be pushed through this portal to make sure you're not plagiarizing. And it would spit out a score for you. And it's like, 40% of this is plagiarized, or it's worded in a way that it could be suspect that you didn't write this, you're on your own. So you need to go change it. And it would tell you highlight sections and things. And I just felt like that was such a stupid thing in the first place. I understand, like, you want to, the teachers or professors are trying to, show that somebody's actually learning. But it was funny for me because I actually made a lot of money in college freelance writing other people's papers for them. I took entire courses for people. And, ethics of that aside, for me, it was like, I'm interested in writing. I love to write. I'm interested in new ideas. I'm interested in taking these courses because it's going to give me more reps, and like being able to game the system was part of the fun, like that rebellion. But I think OpenAI is going to force college educators. They're going to be reactionary. And I think that you're already seeing this some in different levels of education, where some school districts have come out and been like, we're banning this outright. We're not even going to attempt to think critically about how this could be valuable or useful. It's a threat, and we only see the worst case application, and we're going to respond in a reactionary way to block it and prevent it. I think that's stupid in the first place for a variety of reasons, but namely being that it's like an innovative technology that if you are under the suspicion that this is temporary, then you're crazy. Like, this is here to stay, and it's only going to get better. And AI is probably going to outpace any type of plagiarism software or any preventative measure that you can think of. So, like, you need to figure out how to implement and integrate this or empower students with it, as opposed to be like, we're going to block it. The other thing is, what I'm probably more excited about, whether this is limited to educate like schools or just education in general, is college writing and academic writing is so boring in the first place. I think that it's going to be very easy for OpenAI to replicate that at a high level, and probably even better than the way most students write in an academic context. But good writing is hard. It's very difficult. And in many cases, it's not about how much content can you stuff in that you went and browsed the internet for and then regurgitated, whether you copied and pasted it or just kind of shifted it around, but like actual cogent writing. I think what we're going to see is, in the long run, is this appreciation for people's ability to write more concisely and think more clearly, as opposed to just like I've been playing around in OpenAI too, like giving it prompts and reading it, and it's like, this is the most sterile output possible. And it's not that it's not factually correct and good, but it's like I'm reading academic writing to some degree when you prompt it that way. Like it can still be kind of funny, and like it can write, like there are use cases where it's written really good copy, like marketing and sales copy. But I do think that it's going to make it all the more important that you learn how to communicate in a really highly effective way, in a more contextual and empathetic and human way, as opposed to just like factual writing and writing for length and all of that. So there are probably a million other things that we could talk about, like how it's exciting, specific to education and not, but specifically college and higher ed's reaction to like students using it for evil. I think it's laughable.
It is. And it's funny too, because I've also spent a lot of time playing with the chatbot and experimenting with different types of prompts. And as somebody who's running a content company, I have a vested interest in learning how to use it well. But it's also, it's not, there's a type of writing it's very good at replicating, which is the very sterile, boring, formulaic stuff. But it's very bad at the things that are soulful and human and actually interesting to read. And it's also very limited in its cognitive capacity. Like I've tried to prompt it with different types of things that rebelEducator is writing about. Like, and it comes back with this very canned response about how whenever I try to prompt it with anything that's even hinting at being anti-school, it has this canned response about how we can't talk about things that are anti-school because it might come across as discouraging education. It's very funny.
Yeah, I've seen the very same thing, like trying to prompt it about alternatives to college or things like that. And it's like that violates the rules. It's in its infancy. One of the things that does excite me, and this is definitely relevant to what you're doing too, and as a content creator, and I think about this too, is like as the AI development curves increases and like the different applications improve and different entrepreneurs like leverage this tool in exciting ways to build different use cases. One of the things that this imaginative application of it is when you have this sort of AI bot at your service that has been programmed to your specific content style creation and your sort of core ideas. And it's like everything I've ever created, I can load in that as like the source library. And now I can sort of become a much higher leverage content creator. I can sort of more easily organize my ideas. I can more easily sort of create short prompts or repurpose my existing ideas into different distribution types. So like, it's like load every newsletter or a blog post you've ever written. Now create a ton of social media content from that. Don't rewrite it. Don't turn it into robot speak, but like use my ideas. I think that those types of applications are really exciting, just for creating more content at a higher leverage way.
I agree completely. And I think when you're thinking about the way colleges are reacting to it and educators, again, at least old guard educators are reacting to it, there's a lot of panic, a lot of like, we just need to not let kids do this because it breaks the rules of what we know, versus teaching them how to use it constructively as a tool, because like you said, it's not going anywhere and it's just going to get more powerful. In your mind, what does that mean to teach kids how to use it effectively or how to use it as a tool? Like, how should we be teaching young people to use AI or encouraging them to experiment with it? And I know it's very new, so like there's not a concrete answer, but I'm curious what you think that might look like.
Well, I think that the easiest sort of analogy in my mind is thinking about the way people responded first to like search engines in the first place, and then sources like Wikipedia, where assuming there's no like nefarious man behind the curtain that's adjusting search algorithms to only produce certain types of like, these are good, this is good information and this is bad, like assuming good intent and like goodwill across the board. I think that teaching people how to ask really good questions or write really effective prompts so that they can more quickly get to the answers they're looking for, or they can more quickly elicit search results that are useful for the query they're trying to find. So this is one direct example in my own life of this. Is sometimes when you're first exposed to a new idea, you get really excited by. And you're like, I want to learn everything I can about this. And you start down that rabbit trail. You read the first few books that, somebody has recommended, or the first few things that you've stumbled upon. It's very difficult to take that leap to like, what are all of the very best resources when you're trying to do that on your own? And this is why school has such a strong establishment historically too, is they have this sort of like monopoly and enforced monopoly on like this esoteric knowledge and esoteric like information base. And so it's like, if you want to learn about X at a high level, you've got to go to this university. And, we've seen the democratization of information access over the past 20 to 30 years in a really good way, but it's still very difficult to go curate and craft and create your own curriculum on any type of subject. And part of the limitations of that is sometimes you just don't have the proper vocabulary to go input search terms. And this is where something like AI is exciting, because it's like, now help me find all the different applications of this idea that I'm starting to explore. I'm really excited about it. And how I would go find this same idea in different schools of thought that use a different word. And that's, that's how I like to learn. Because like sometimes you'll have an idea that you're really interested in, you'll start learning about it. And it could be years before you stumble upon the same idea in a different school of thought. So for one practical example of this is like, I'm really into copywriting and sales and marketing in general. And I've read dozens of copywriting books, probably more, and like done years and years of just learning and pursuing this out of like this sort of single-minded obsession. But there's an entirely different school of thought on this if you go read psychology. And it's still really valuable to the same kind of idea I was interested in. There's this entire other library of stuff that they maybe, they maybe talk about it using the word like persuasion instead of copywriting. And like there's things like, if you go down that rabbit trail, with these search words, you're going to find a ton of other points of view on this. And, ad infinitum, there's different, that's just one kind of bridging the gap. Like, using AI as a way to enrich your own personal education. I think that being able to allow people to more richly develop their own sort of personal curriculum plans, their personal education plans, and like help them find resources and curate things, that's a really exciting thing longer term.
Yeah, it serves in some ways the same purpose that the essay was intended to, which is helping you clarify and expand your thinking, except it's much more expansive because you're learning how to ask the right questions and find the resources instead of just regurgitating what you're learning, which is a lot of what the college essay is. In a world where AI can write decent blog posts, decent sales copy, it can rewrite your LinkedIn profile, what's the case for learning how to be a good writer on your own without the technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the commercial application begins to decline. Like, your ability to go get a job as a writer or content creator, you're going to now be competing against a much more adequate opponent in those cases. But I think that the argument for that as an end into itself is still the same. Your ability to write effectively, it sort of is contingent on your ability to think clearly and your ability to think cogently, and that is sort of the foundation of your ability to work towards the results you want out of life. You cannot divorce that relationship between writing and thinking and communicating clearly. And I think that you've probably experienced this too. Like, you're a content creator, you interact with a ton of people who are promoting ideas and interested in their ideas. And this has been my experience, and maybe it's been the same for you or not, but like anytime that I think that there is a distinct difference when you interact with people who have clearly spent a ton of time, not just contemplating an idea, but they spend a ton of time creating content around that idea, whether they're like prolific on social media or blogging or not, but they've thought deeply, they've sat down, they've constructed arguments, they've dissected that, they've revisited it, and they've like manipulated the contents physically with their hands. Like there is something about sitting down and taking your ideas out of your head, putting them down, whether you're using a keyboard or physically writing, like capturing that information on a page that forces you to clarity. And that is a really important and critical skill for learning how to go out into the world and sort of craft your life into something that you want it to be. And I think that people who don't respect or appreciate sort of that process and that struggle of learning how to write and think clearly, they struggle. They struggle to go sort of change their lives from where it is today into like something more of what they wanted. And it's not just because they don't know how to write. It's because sort of the more fundamental problem is they haven't done the work to think clearly, to learn how to think clearly. And that's sort of the foundation of everything else.
Does teaching kids how to use AI, whether it's in middle school, high school, which we're going to see a lot of, or whether it's in college, does that negatively impact their potential to learn how to think clearly down the road because it's easy to outsource answers or easy to get the illusion of a well-compiled and well-examined opinion because you've asked the AI a series of questions and you think you've come to the answer, but you haven't truly like wrestled with it yourself? Is there like, what is the level of danger there, or what is the antidote to that?
Yeah, well, I think that we've already seen this over the past 20 years, the way people use Google, like they have the answers to everything in their pocket. And so they know a lot of surface level information about a ton of topics. And that gives them sort of this perceived confidence that they are a well-educated person or they're very smart. And like, I think that it's easy if you have a conversation with anybody to identify their level of depth or their lack of depth very quickly about a particular subject matter. I think that is likely going to continue. And the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of people don't want to do the hard work of exploring subjects deeply and getting lost in it. I think to some degree it's a net benefit. I think the fewer things people have to memorize, the better. Like the more mind share that you can devote to like deep critical thinking, and the sort of more information that you can have a shortcut or proxy for, like the better. There's still like, if you're going to, be a subject matter expert in something, like, yeah, you should probably retain a lot of information, a lot of things that you're going to learn over time through your own experience. But like stuff that you don't care about, it's still going to be great if you can more adequately sort through everything and get to sort of the core important ideas. All of that said, I think that we already live in an age of information abundance. That's not going to change. If anything, it's going to accelerate sort of the output and creation of content. I think it's going to be important, and there's going to be a big market opportunity for individuals and companies and entities that are curating information. And they are sort of curating and giving you an assessment of the quality. So as this volume of information just grows at an exponential rate, like what percentage of that is actually good content or the best stuff? I think things like reading books is probably going to become less common over time, but the people who do still read through all the classics and read literature instead of just like business content and like digitally AI created content, like they're going to have an exponential growth rate in their lives because they're outpacing sort of this like, more shallow way of learning, or more shallow, the people who their learning is limited to sort of shallow information.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that the ease of accessing general information is, as that increases, the returns on doing the things that have been proven to be useful for an extended period of time are going to increase. partly because there's more you can do with it, but also partly because so few people are going to be doing it, but the value isn't going away. You and I have both spent a lot of time over the past few years thinking about like, what are the actual core things that everybody does need to know versus all of the stuff that you can pick up over time, or the things that are changing too that aren't relevant. I talk a lot about how like 20 years ago, nobody was planning on raising the next social media manager. That didn't even exist yet. And that the pace of things changing is increasing even more quickly and is going to probably continue to accelerate dramatically. What, in your mind, as you see it now, what are the most important, like universal skills that people should learn, both like kids preparing to enter the workforce for the first time, but also as adults too, because we're all navigating the changes? Like what seem to be the most universal things that everybody should learn, regardless of the changing professional landscape, or that are going to prepare them to navigate the changes to like make them more adaptable and more creative and make it easier for them to jump on things as opportunities evolve?
Yep. Yeah. So sort of at the bottom of the pyramid here, when I think about sort of all of the skills, the most fundamental ones are still like how to think, how to, I would normally say read, but like I would say how to learn is probably a better word, because we may be moving towards a world where less of content is truly like text-based and more of it's like video-based or some hybrid or whatever. But you do need to know how to like take in information, digest it, meditate on it, parse it out, analyze it, and like think clearly. So there's some combination of thinking, writing, learning. So it's your ability to think clearly. It's your ability to communicate effectively, whether that's written or orally or whatever. And it's your ability to take in information and like assess that and make definitions and allow that to enrich your understanding of the world and improve your ability to interact with the world in a more predictable way. That's sort of the bedrock of everything. And I think that the end of education in that sense, like that is an end unto itself, because that is improving your ability to make your life more of what you want it to be and less of what you don't want it to be, regardless of sort of what direction you choose to take your life in. Those are the most critical things. So I think to that end, there are things like philosophy that is a component of that. And that doesn't mean you have to have a philosophy degree, but you should have some sort of relationship with philosophy. And this could be through religion too. I think that there are a lot of traditions of religion that are sort of a stepping stone into philosophical thinking for people in terms of like defining a values hierarchy for their life, and sort of this trade-off between like cause and effect of, hey, I do this, it's bad. I do this, it's good. There's a reward for this. There's a penalty for this. Like that type of thinking is really important. That's where I'd say philosophy is valuable. Some level of economic thinking, I think, is also really, really critical. And it doesn't have to be some ridiculous college or graduate level economic education either. It's sort of the basic things like the value creation mindset and the understanding of like positive sum games, and that when I create something valuable that other people want and we participate in a mutual exchange of value, the world is a better place. It's not worse off because I've extracted value from somebody else. They're actually better off because I've created value for them. They've given value back to me in exchange, and like sort of that level of economic thinking. I would say paired with that, like understanding opportunity cost is another core one, that the earlier you're exposed to this idea, it's really valuable of like, I have a limited amount of time on this planet. And to that, like I have agency over what I choose to do and how I choose to invest my time. And if I do this, it means that I am unable to do this. or I'm unable to do this instead. So you have to be like understanding the trade-offs of how you spend your time and how you spend your resources. That's another really valuable one. So we talked about like writing, thinking, communicating, philosophy, economics. I think beyond that, there's sort of tactical infrastructure that's really valuable for you to understand, especially in the complex world we live in. And it's probably going to, only going to become even more complex over time. And so like, it's not enough to just understand how to create value or creating value for other people is beneficial to you. But like also, what are the required resources for you to live the life you want? And so to some extent, you're probably going to have to create value for other people. You're going to have to trade your time or trade your intellect or trade your skills or abilities to earn an income so that you can keep a roof over your head, so that you can feed yourself and feed your family and do any other thing. So like learning about personal finance is a core thing, especially in a world where, because of technology, we're seeing this growing disparity between the people who are value creators and people who are just net consumers. And like, if you want to move up that curve from like net consumer to value creator, if you want to be able to access outsized opportunities for yourself, one, you have to take care of yourself and like put yourself in a position where you're not disqualifying yourself from your ability to work on bigger problems, which is like, this is part of my core argument against colleges that exist today is like going and starting your adult life $100,000 in debt behind is a really bad way to enable yourself to access really cool opportunities, because you're behind before you even get to start. And so that's where I'd say personal finance does become important, but personal finance enriched with sort of this economic thinking, this philosophical thing, this idea of like living in a world where people are mutually exchanging value as a sort of North Star for how to interact with other people. That's where I think the rest of the skills that you could go and build on top of sort of that bedrock, it's a matter of your preference. Some people may be, they may be inclined to be artists, and they're creating things that are of aesthetic value, and rather than like actual tangible value, aesthetic value. And I think that that's great in a world where, in a world of abundance, which I think AI and other technology tends to lead to a world of more abundance. Maybe people that they want to tack on sort of this aesthetic skill set on top of sort of those other things. There may be people who want to go into the sciences. I think this is going to be a really valuable opportunity for people, and an even more surefire route to success financially is like pursuing a very, very pursuing high level STEM fields and like things like rockets, things like energy, all of those things. There are probably dozens of other sort of directions you could take your life, but I think there's sort of that foundational set of skills. And then how I'd summarize the rest is like, you have to pick one other skill that you want to specialize in. And that it doesn't have to be a general thing. I think that, for young adults today, I would say like, if you don't have some very technical inclination, like art or accounting, or and accounting may go away too, law may go away too, but like science, the hard sciences, or creating content, creating like being a novel thinker or something like that, like go learn how to sell stuff. And that may, become a different career path down the road as well. But there's sort of that combination of like foundational skills and then sort of life direction skills. Like, which direction do you want to take your life, and what problems do you want to work on, and how do you want to spend your time, and what's important to you? I think that you can blend those two. Like, you don't have to just be a scientist. Like, maybe you're an artist and, a scientist or whatever. But sort of that way of looking at things, I think, is really important.
Well, the most interesting and creative thinking and effective scientists do have a background in something artistic or something. They're multidisciplinary. They're not just one thing. I find it really interesting that what you're describing is basically a slightly pragmatic twist on like a standard liberal arts education. It's slightly more grounded in where it's going than like sometimes it's like, well, I'm going to spend 4 years studying art history and classical literature because I don't really know what I want to do. It's a little bit more forward thinking than that, but it's kind of the same thing. It's much less technically grounded and much more liberal arts based, which I think is a really important part of the conversation because there's sort of an overreaction that often happens where people are like, we're not learning anything relevant to building a career. We just have to go and spend like, a year going through a sales boot camp or something and just focus on the technical skills so that we have something that we can sell to people and forget about the grounding, which is so important. But I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I'm pleasantly surprised consistently by the fact that I meet a lot of founders and startup people and high-level professionals in different fields. And without fail, they all seem to have some kind of grounding in they've read a lot of classical literature, or they have like a weird nerdy interest in philosophy and have gone deep down the rabbit hole, or they have like a deep understanding of economics. Usually multiple things. They have interesting art hanging in their homes. And it's not just like, there to make them look smart. They actually can talk about it and they're really interested in it. And there is this, I think, underappreciated correlation between, like, if you focus on the things that give you strong grounding as a human, it makes you a stronger thinker and it makes it easier for you to navigate whatever practical things you want to go chase as well. It makes it easier to learn the practical skills too.
Yeah, I think a part of it though, it boils down to like curiosity. I think most people start out as curious. Like as kids, they're like curious. They're high in imagination.
Why?
They want to know. They want to know. They want to touch the stove and they want to know and they want to burn themselves again and they want to understand why. And the world is this like thing to be explored. And I think a lot of people that end up being highly successful, especially in the entrepreneurial sphere or in like the top 1% echelon of whatever it is that they, whatever domain they develop expertise in, it's because they haven't lost that love of learning and that love of the pursuit of truth and excellence and discovery in whatever domain it is. And I think that's why there probably is an apparent correlation or apparent correlation of like people who are successful. They happen to have these backgrounds that are like multidisciplinary and like they have these weird interests that is like this tapestry of like weird interconnected and some things like obscure interests. It's because they're curious and they weren't afraid to go pursue that. And that's part of the beef with education that I'm sure, and this is a shared belief or very closely held belief, is that school tends to quash that curiosity, or it's not. And even if you don't say it negatively destroys that. It definitely does not enable it. It's not designed to enable and foster the development of curiosity in a deep way. And that's where, when we talk about like what are the things you should learn, I also think that it's very difficult to have that conversation without talking about how you go about conducting that. Because whether you're a young kid or you're older or in your later life, like how you go about learning things is very important. Like especially if your goal is like mastering the thing, or if your goal is like leading the most enriched, fulfilling life is probably a better way of what I'd say is a good aim. Learning things just for the sake of somebody else telling you that you need to learn them is a really poor way of going about designing education, because it's not curiosity-led or interest-led learning. And that's part of the dangers of constructing any type of curriculum or education system, is you have to allow, it has to have a certain level of elasticity built in to provide for people to pursue their own interests while also getting the stuff that they do need to get. The stuff that you become almost deficient as a human being if you don't know how to do these things. You need to pick those up, but you can't just force feed it to people. You probably don't need to know, the capital of every state in America. You don't need to know like world geography as a way to interact with the world around you. Now, is your worldview far enriched by understanding different cultures and like traveling and doing that? Yes, it is. But like the best way to do that isn't like making people memorize a bunch of stuff. And so when it comes to sort of designing what are the core things people need to do, or core people, like what are the core things we should all learn? I think it's also just important to temper that with how do you go about designing the pathway for people to pursue their interests deeply while also getting sort of the adequate level of proficiency in things that do really matter.
How did you make it through the education system without having your curiosity entirely crushed?
Well, I love school, so it was easy for me. And part of this was like, I think something that I really enjoyed. I mean, I like games. I like puzzles. And for me, school was a game and a puzzle. And like this idea of like a competence-based hierarchy was a fun game for me to figure out how to solve. But I also just loved learning as a kid. I was the kid that like, from the second that I learned how to read, I just always had books and I was just curious. I was just like, I read the dictionary as a kid. And it wasn't because somebody was forcing me to. I just was interested in that stuff. I was like a kid with my head in the clouds and I had a big imagination. And I think, part of this, it's not so much like, hey, me pat myself on the back. I was just a good learner. It was that, my mom was a teacher. She worked in special education for 20 years and has been a teacher in, every sort of other subject for another 20 years. And like, I think at an early age, she sort of recognized that I just had like an inordinate imagination and like proclivity and desire to learn stuff. And she empowered me, and it wasn't just going to school. Like she would bring home advanced textbooks because like in math, I took, 3 or 4, 5 grades of math accelerated because my mom was a teacher and she was able to like, provide access to stuff that I was actually interested in. And I think that's a core part of it. It's not that I was good at particular subjects. It's that anytime I expressed interest in a particular thing, I wasn't able to go as deep into that thing that I wanted to as a kid. And that was the core part. It's like my mom used to drop me off at the library in the summers as a kid because that's where all the books were. And I could just go browse the shelves and I had access to sort of anything that I was interested in. And I don't think that has to be academic learning. You don't have to succeed academically to lead a really fulfilling life or to be wildly successful. I think the important part of education is remembering that it's not just schooling. It's pursuing the things that you're interested in and pursuing mastery in those things or pursuing them as deeply as you sort of deem fit for yourself. For some kids that are more mechanically inclined, like maybe getting them outside, letting them work in a more tactile way with their hands and learning engineering, even if it's in a much more elementary way, like let them go work on the vehicles with dad, or let them, take them, find a mechanic shop where they can go learn or watch some videos or things like that. And they can work with their hands. Like it doesn't matter what your expressed interests are at a young age, but like if you're a parent and you have this inclination to provide the best education for your kid, is like find what they're interested in and help enable them to pursue that in a deep way. And anytime they find a new interest, let them dip their toe in the water and explore it and pursue that in a more deep way until they find the next thing or they want to pursue it at a deeper level. And I will be eternally grateful to my parents for doing that outside of just the school system.
And you had a pretty traditional education all the way through getting a bachelor's degree, right? Like standard high school experience, went straight to college, did it in 4 years. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because there was an interesting pivot after, like now you're working in alternative education and you're very critical of the traditional system in many ways. And you also went into college alternative programs after doing college, which is also very interesting and we'll get to in a second. But what was that experience like for you, or what was notable about it in retrospect?
Yeah. So I'll illustrate this with kind of a funny story. So by the time I'd gotten to like 6th grade, I was very advanced in several subjects. And the traditional school model really was poorly fit, was a poor fit for me, because it wasn't just because I was academically inclined, but it was because I was advancing at a rate that like sort of school, it wasn't designed to support. And so I was advanced in math. I was like geeking out about this stuff outside of class. Like I always did my homework, and I spent more time reading and like, always trying to get, the bonus points and extra assignments, just because I loved that kind of stuff. It was fun for me. It was a contest to win for me. But my sixth grade teacher, who wasn't a great teacher by any means, he thought it'd be funny for me to take the GED and just see how I did. And I passed the GED in sixth grade. And it's kind of a funny thing thinking back, because it was such a stupid, like rudimentary, like that's all you need to do to be able to get the stamp of approval. It wasn't because it was difficult at all. It was just like rudimentary stuff. And so I tell that story as a way of saying that like I wasted a lot of time. And when you think about just like advancing through, I wouldn't have like graduated high school sooner or anything like that, because I wasn't mature enough to go out in the real world. But what I think is important is understanding that learning all of the stuff you need to know to get the stamp of approval that you have gotten what school systems are designed to do, the bar is so low. Like most above average students are probably already capable of like passing the required tests. And so those required tests are a really poor rubric for measuring whether somebody's actually able to go out in the world and build a life for themselves and be a good participating member of the world and economy and like, live a virtuous life and all of those things. And I think that I understood that, even if I couldn't articulate that for a long time. I was always frustrated with sort of the way that school was conducted. I was frustrated with like the inability, like the lack of fluidity, the inability to like advance at the rate that you were interested in developing mastery in something. And so when I got into college, I was excited about college. I'd always thought that I was going to go to medical school. And because I was academically inclined, and that's what smart kids were supposed to do, is you go to medical school, or if you can't cut that, you go to law school. And if you can't cut it there, you go be an accountant. And like, that's what you do. If you can't cut it there, you become a college professor. Like that's what smart kids were supposed to do. And when I got to college, it was immediately obvious to me that it was just more of the same. And this is where I began to develop this like huge chip on my shoulder for education, because school was a game still, and I knew how to play the game. I knew that I could go take tests and pass tests without like going and sitting in classes. But the school system, as it was designed, was like, here are the rules. It's less important about it's less about mastery. It's more about following the rules. It's more about compliance. And that was the part of education that absolutely rubbed me the wrong way, because because it was a game, my approach to it was like, nah, if I can pass your test, it shouldn't matter if I'm ever in class. If I can go read the book on my own and I can come demonstrate mastery, then I've passed the test. And I think that's a wrong way to think about education in general, but that was my point of view at the time, because that's the way sort of the system is designed. And so my college experience was very rocky when it comes to like relationships with professors. And I still had a really good GPA coming out of college, but for the most part, like there were a lot of classes where I almost was failed because of conflicts with professors. And it was this same sort of odds of ideology, which mine was like, I think that mastery is about, your ability to take that knowledge and apply it to the world. And what I was being told by the system was, no, mastery without compliance is not mastery at all. And that was the part that frustrated me so much, is like, who cares if you follow the rules, if you get the right answer on the test? Who cares if you show your work? If I can get to the right answers, if I can figure out how to apply this, and I can do it in a third of the time, then why does it matter? And that's part of the thing that really, that's why entrepreneurship felt like such a perfect environment, because it's like there isn't this right answer to the test. There's multiple different ways that you could go about solving this problem. And it's on you to make a choice. And then it's on you to adapt if that choice is right or wrong. Like, you're the one in control. And the only thing that's telling you if you're doing right or not is this feedback from other people and from the world around you. And like, that small taste when I was in college, while I was having this sort of ideological conflict with the school system and schooling in general, I got involved with a very early stage startup. And I had that sort of epiphany opportunity where I was seeing like how entrepreneurs solve problems versus like this school system. And it changed everything.
What do you mean it changed everything?
It changed everything because it was a world that I didn't know existed, which is like this world of like, you don't have to wait for permission. Like, if you have the best idea, go do it. Or if you just take initiative and get market feedback, like, that's a much better way to advance your ideas. And so I'll give you a specific example. Like, there was this internship that I had. I was working with a startup for 3 years. It was basically a glorified internship. And I remember we were having a problem. We were selling advertisements. It was a media company. And that's part of what I was doing, selling advertisements to businesses for this media publication and online media site and things. And we were getting feedback from some of our businesses. They're like, you guys haven't run our ads. It's like, yes, we have. And they wanted some way of like confirmation. And it's a startup, so things were messy. And so Foursquare was a really big thing at the time. And so we had the idea, like, I'm going to go check in at all these businesses with their advertisements. When I drop off their newspapers with the ads in them, I'm going to take a picture at their business. I'm going to check in. This is confirmation that they've seen their ad. It's a picture of their ad. It's date stamped, time stamped. It's geographic stamped. Like, this is a solution to a problem that is actually a costly problem, because some of our customers were coming back and saying, hey, we never saw our ads, therefore we think they didn't run. Very simple problem. Wasn't even a big deal. But like, that solution to the problem, like, I remember when I did that was something that a lot of the other campuses that were part of this media company, they started implementing. And I remember my manager that I was working for at the time was like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go do that. And I was presenting about this in class. There was some problem or something that we had to solve in a class. And I used this as an example, and I got a grade on it, and it wasn't a big deal. But like, that contrast of like trying to solve problems in the real world and seeing how they could be implemented and make things better, as opposed to like solving problems to get a grade, was just a really stark contrast that I had, nearly 3 years of experience, this contrast. And by the time I graduated, I just like, my perspective about the value of schooling was just very, like, I had very, very low confidence that it was as valuable as the time that I had spent working in a business.
And then you ended up going through a college alternative startup apprenticeship program that run called Praxis after you'd graduated and after you had the startup experience. So why did you do the program? What did you feel like was missing?
Yeah, so when I got out of college, I felt like I was even more confused about the world than when I'd started. I'd felt like I knew I wanted to be involved in business, but the thing that was scary is like, I don't have a clear path to this sort of messy path of entrepreneurship. I had a freelance photography business at the time, and I was doing that. And everybody at the time, college advisors and friends and sort of all the people that I had in my life at the time that were giving me advice while I was trying to figure out what to do next were like, well, you should go to law school or get an MBA. Like, that's going to be the best way to guarantee that you can go get involved in business.
And also defer making a decision on what exactly to do by at least 2 more years.
Yeah, well, it's going to be 3.5 more years. But at the time, I just didn't have a better hypothesis. It never occurred to me that it's like, just go find a business to work for. But, I was, the nice thing is that I was somewhat apprehensive to debt, which is another valuable thing my parents gave me, is sort of this apprehension to mortgaging your future. And so I took every job I could get. Like I was just working. I worked in financial services. Then I went and worked for a law firm. And that's where I began to have this hunch that like, maybe I don't want to go to law school, but that's still the best idea I have in mind. My interest in photography landed me another opportunity. And that's how I ended up learning about Praxis. But I got a couple weeks before I was supposed to start, JD MBA program. And that's where I met the founder of Praxis. And Praxis is very, very early at the time still. And we immediately hit it off. And I think the reason we hit it off is we recognize sort of this mutual understanding of like the way that the world is, the way that school is not the best way out there. And one of the things that he said to me is like, he seemed like a smart, ambitious, hardworking guy. Like, why would you go sit and wait in school for 3.5, 4 more years when you can be out in the real world doing real stuff? And so he posed a big challenge to me at the time. And I think one of the other things that I really appreciated is he was talking to me like an adult when we had this conversation. Like I had the capacity for designing my own future and I had agency over my own life and decisions. And I felt like academia was all like, you have to do this. You're like, until you're out in the real world and you've had 10 years into your career, you're still an infant and you're incapable of like making your own choices. And that was part of the thing I was running from as well. But Isaac, posed a big challenge to me. He said, give me 1 year. He's like, give me 1 year. Let me help make some introductions for you to businesses and entrepreneurs who are working on cool things. If 1 year from now, you don't have more clarity about what it is you want to do, then go back to school. It's always going to be there. And that's like the worst case scenario. But the upside is you have more clarity. You're involved in a business. You're getting a first world education in business. And maybe you don't have to go wait 3.5 more years and you can avoid the student debt. So the upside is like nearly limitless. And the floor is not that bad, worst case scenario. And I felt like that was a really good wager. For me, I ended up, instead of going to law school, I ended up going and working as the right hand to a CEO of another early stage startup, sort of before it exploded. And for 3.5 years, sort of got that MBA in the real world as this company went from around 20 employees to nearly 200. And I sort of got to be on the front lines. And over that tenure, I worked in pretty much every function of the business at one point or another. And that was the exclamation point on an idea that had been brewing for years, is that experience. This solidified something that I already knew I felt to be true. And now I've lived that experience. And so that's where I became sort of more of a zealot, I guess, for helping other people realize the same thing, that there are alternative ways to do this. You don't have to just go suffer through school and feel bored and feel like mastery is subject to compliance. There is a way to go develop mastery and build this proof of mastery in the real world for yourself that doesn't require somebody else stamping that you followed all the rules and you passed all the tests. And that was something that was addicting for me immediately, is that concept and like having the experience that sort of proved that hypothesis for me in my own life.
I feel like a lot of people have a similar experience. I definitely did, where once you've taken the leap and you've realized I can try my hand in the real world, and if it doesn't work out, the alternative of more school is always there. Once you've taken a leap and you've tasted it and you felt what it feels like to be learning by like truly doing not just projects that you're concocting on your own, but actual at a business, cutting your teeth, doing something that like maybe you're not even supposed to be able to do yet, but you're doing something where you can see the real world feedback of what you're doing. At least for me, it was almost immediate. It was like, I'm never going back to school. I didn't go to college at all, as you know, and I treated my first 4 years out of college as a grand experiment. I was like, I'm going to see how far I can get in 4 years. Yep. And if I'm not happy with it, if it feels like I'm not on the same trajectory I would have been if I'd gone, I can always go back to school. And I feel like within 6 months, it was like, I never thought about going back to school ever again. It didn't hold any value or any interests to me whatsoever.
I know. And I'm very excited about a future where college is the backup plan. It's not the default plan. I think you always hear people say, well, college isn't for everybody. But I dream of a future where the saying is college is only for some people. Like only some people who they want to be college professors or, some other narrow field, or maybe when universities are more truly focused just on pure research, there's a career path that's actually productive to society there. But for the most part, it's like there's better ways to learn almost everything and faster and more affordably and more effective. And that's a future that, I get excited about every time I think about it.
And it's way easier than people think too. It feels like this giant, scary thing when you've never been out in the real world doing things before to step into something that's like professional and grown up and that has like all these barriers to entry, especially when the whole world, like everybody told me I was insane for not going to college. Everybody was convinced I was ruining my life, even by deferring it by a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to think about taking the leap when it seems like it's so hard, but in reality, it's incredibly easy. Like the world is hungry for young people who want to go do stuff.
It is, but I think it's important to qualify, like make the distinction that it's not easier than school. School is very easy. The problem is people think that on the other side of college, everything is easier as a byproduct. And that's not true. All you've done is delayed the inevitable work you're going to have to do either now or 4 to 6 years from now. And chances are you're going to be in a worse spot 4 to 6 years from now. And that's the thing is like, no, it's not hard to go be successful without college. The problem is it's so easy to allow inertia to take you through school where it's very easy to be successful. College is not hard. It's actually relatively easy. They literally tell you how to be successful. You go, you learn the material, you go, you follow the rules, like play the game. It's very easy to win. They've defined all of the parameters for you. That's not true in the real world. It's not difficult to learn how to master that and like be effective and like build your life in the real world, but there isn't a perfect playbook for it. And that's what I think freaks people out is the unknown and uncertainty. But that's work you have to do one way or the other, unless you just never leave academia, I suppose.
Talk to me a little bit about the value proposition of Praxis. I think a lot of people listening to this are vaguely familiar, at least because I talk about it a lot because it was such a formative part of my own experience stepping outside of the system. But what's the general overview? Because it's changed a lot too since you went through it. It was a very different, or like a much earlier program than it is now. Yeah. There's a lot more learning that's gone into the development of what Praxis is. How do you describe it to people?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest picture idea to walk away from is that it's a year focused on your own personal, professional, and career development. That's at the end of the day, what we're focused on as a company is like talent development, helping people explore what's out there, helping people cultivate their skills, helping people recognize that there are multiple points of entry into a life and career that is exciting and fulfilling for you. The nuts and bolts of the program has changed over the years and will continue to make improvements and changes over time. And, whether that means you're getting hired into a full-time job or an apprenticeship and when that happens in the program or whether that's part of a core part of the program or not, if it's more just focused on pure skill development. But like ultimately, the challenge to the traditional sort of higher education model that Praxis is like, you already have everything you need. What you do need is, and when I say you have everything that you need, I mean, if you have work ethic, you're intellectually curious, you're high character, you do have everything you need. What you need to find is a community to tap into of people who are going to challenge you to work hard on developing your potential. You need to find people who have already done what it is you're trying to do that you can learn from, and they can kind of mentor you on along to this next step of your life and career as you're still trying to figure things out. You need to find a point of entry where you can start earning money so you can become self-sufficient and like begin to be less reliant on other people. Like in order to be a full, adult, to be I think in order to like really begin to develop your identity, you need to go out on your own and learn how to live on your own and survive and take care of yourself. And so part of that is not just finding gainful employment. It's also understanding the relationship between, you have choices in life. You can trade your time for income, or you can trade your mastery for income, or a product that you develop for income. Like there are different ways to make money, but it all starts with like figuring out what other people value and how to exchange that value for other people, how to convince them of the value that you can create. And like that mindset, that's such a critical part of Praxis. Like the ethos is like helping people recognize that value creation mindset. And if that's like, after 12 months of going through the program, if that's the biggest thing people take away with, and they've had a great experience in my mind, because that mindset is such a fundamental shift from some of the stuff we've already talked about. Like the way that education leads you to believe the world is like, hey, there are tests with right and wrong answers. And it's not that easy out there. What actually is the hard thing to figure out is like figure out what problems are out there in the world that don't have perfect crystal clear black and white solutions, and like figure out how to solve those for other people. And so that's a big part of the program experience, is helping people gain a richer, more broad context of how the world works, how business works, and how to go navigate your career and professional life on your own without sort of the traditional conveyor belt and infrastructure that we're told how to go do a career, which is like, you get good grades in school, you do decent on tests so that you can get into a good college. Then you pick a major and you spend 4 years doing this, and they're going to hand you a job at the other end. And then you're going to work for 40 years. They're going to give you a gold watch and a pension, and you can retire and live happily ever after. And not only is that not true, that path does not even exist anymore. That's not real. Outside of probably, higher level, like hard science career paths and accounting. And, I'm even hesitant to say law, because, that's potentially, $100,000+ more dollars of student debt in order to sort of access those things. So I know I got a little bit long-winded there, but ultimately it's about helping people give them more agency over their lives and careers.
Can you talk a little bit about the program mechanics too? Like what the actual experience is like for the participants coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first 6 months, it is skill development, mentorship, workshops, and a very strong emphasis on helping you learn how to take those skills and translate them into a full-time job opportunity. Like that's the first thing. This is not let us help you find your dream career path, the one thing you're meant to do for the rest of your life. And I think that's a foolish notion anyway. That's not really how the best careers are forged. Instead, it's let us help you make the strongest start possible. Here are some fundamentals to that. 1, you need to build some skills. 2, you need to go out in the real world and get some real world work experience. You need to find a really, ideally, if you can find an early career opportunity that gives you even more valuable experience than the types of jobs you can access today. So like the average teenager, young 20-year-old, like, let's be realistic. If you don't have much experience, you don't have any developed skills that you've built on your own, like your pool of opportunities is pretty small. You can go get jobs at the grocery store. You can go work construction. You can work retail, fast food. You can wait tables. And like maybe if you know somebody, you can find a different sort of like entry point. But for the most part, you're sort of limited to these jobs that are a function of time inputs, not skill inputs. And so if you want to be able to break out of that into the next level, what you need to find is an opportunity that is a function of your time and skill, your time and your intellect, your time and your ability to solve problems, or your time and the mastery along a specific dimension. The problem is that takes time to do. You do have to build some skills, and you have to build something that can convince people to give you sort of those next tier of opportunities. And so that's what the first part of the program is focused on, is like, let's help you gain enough mastery along a specific dimension or a couple different skill areas, that you can access the next level of professional opportunities. And that's the part where the magic really happens. And this isn't just limited to the program experience, but this is like true of anybody's career. Like once you get out there and you break into that next echelon of career opportunities where you actually have that tangible proof and evidence in the real world that it's like, it's not just about my time. It's about my time plus my ability to solve problems for other people that they value. And if you can do that, you can master the world. Like you can literally, if you apply that same principle at a broader scale. And so that's what the program is ultimately focused on helping people foster right now is like build those skills so you can access that next level of opportunities. This doesn't mean you have to be an employee forever, but fortunately unfortunately, I mean, for most young adults, like going and being an employee for a couple years is probably the lowest barrier to entry way for you to go manifest value creation in the real world. Like that's your best way to go get the dose of that's going to enable you to build skills at a deeper level. And then, after you spend a few years, like maybe you want to freelance, maybe you feel like you've developed mastery to go start your own thing, but you do have to build some evidence and some muscle memory there. Like you actually have to go cultivate those skills. So.
And you guys do have quite a few alumni who go on to do, like, start their own businesses. There are Praxian run companies that have hired other Praxians that are like fully staffed by alumni, a bunch of freelancers in the network. Like, people do go on to do a lot of very specialized things once they understand the mechanics of both sort of path discovery and creation, and also how to sell themselves for different types of opportunities, which is a really core thing that most people coming out of college have no idea, clue how to do.
Absolutely. And like the trajectory and timeline for those people who have gone and started their own business or gone from like entry-level employee to VP or director level, like compare that to the trajectory of the 18-year-old who went to college, and like the timeline and trajectory to reach the same level of attainment that we've seen so many alumni have like awesome trajectories in like a matter of 2 to 3 years. And again, it's not just the magic of the program. That's part of it, this value creation mindset, but it's like what you do once you get out in the real world and the secret that it really is as easy as like learning how to be valuable to other people and provide something that they want and like do that and work hard and solve problems and be reliable. It doesn't matter how well you can pass the tests or what, if you know all the capitals to the states or, any other degree you have. It's literally, that's the problem you need to learn how to solve in the real world.
So Praxis has been around for, is it 9 years yet now? 8 years? I can't remember for sure. It's been around for quite a while.
We are going on a decade.
And you have hundreds of alumni with successful stories. You guys were really ahead of the curve in terms of the conversation around alternatives to college. It's become much trendier to talk about than it used to be. Like, I graduated from high school in 2015 and I found Praxis in my senior year of high school, and it was very new, and I latched onto it because I was like, oh my gosh, these are people who are actually talking about not going to college. Some of the team are college dropouts. Maybe I'm not crazy for thinking that I don't want to do this traditional path. But like, when I was looking for resources on skipping college, it was very sparse. And there's a lot more now. You do a Google search for not going to college and there's tons of stuff out there, but you guys were very early, maybe even like challengingly early, because people weren't even quite as ready for it as they are now. But they're also like, there was a lot of fear, and still is, around not taking the traditional path because there's a safety in numbers. It's like, well, yeah, the college debt problem is really bad and lots of people are defaulting on their loans, but like, we're all defaulting together is kind of the feeling. Like, if I do this other thing and I mess up, I'm alone, and that's even scarier. But there's a lot of fear from parents too, where like the kids are ready for something different, but the parents are like not as sold on a non-traditional path being an acceptable or safe option. What are some of the biggest areas of pushback that you feel now, even though Praxis is more established, you have the track record, you have the case studies? Like, what are the biggest fears that you encounter when you're talking to people that make them hesitate to take this path themselves or encourage or allow or support their kids taking a non-traditional path like this?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is that like things have changed even over the past few years. I mean, COVID, the way that universities and colleges responded to COVID was just embarrassing at large. Like a lot of universities raised their prices while going online and they weren't equipped to go online. And I think that that was the first culture shock for many parents because now their kids in many cases are like moving back in with them and they're like through their periphery, they're like getting a glimpse of how college is and like what the actual quality of the education is. And I think that when that's just done online, like, you know, the value of the experience is greatly diminished because you're not getting all the other tangential aspects of college. And I think that like over the past 3 years, I've seen more parents be proactively looking for something better because more parents have gained a better, richer understanding of like what the college experience today is like. Especially when it comes to the parts of the college experience that everybody claims they're paying for, which is like the classes and the degree and everything like that. And it's like, turns out like the core part of the value proposition of college tends to be the other stuff that you're not actually paying for. Like that's why most students want it. I think that's a big part of people's young adults in particular. I think that's a lot of young adults' fear in not going to college is missing out on the college experience that they feel like they're entitled to because everybody before them has had this college experience. And that doesn't mean that it has to be like 4 years of debauchery or anything like that, but like 4 years of the idea of what you think college is supposed to be like is still pretty compelling to a lot of young adults of like, hey, 4 years, you're going to go live out on your own. You're going to get to hang out with a bunch of other cool, interesting, smart people who are discussing ideas. And it's going to be like, you're an adult for the first time. And in many cases, you're living out on your own for the first time. You don't have your parents telling you, when you're supposed to be home or like where you can go and who you can and can't hang out with. And like, it's your first dose of real, true freedom. And that's exciting for people. They don't want to miss out on that. And I think when they think about like, if I don't go to college, how am I going to get that experience? And I think that, Praxis is still a really good way to manufacture most of that. The program is remote, so it's not like you're moving to a campus with a bunch of other people your age. But I would argue that if that social in-person experience is still something valuable to you, whether you go through Praxis or look for an alternative college or not, is like, find a city where there's a bunch of other young professionals that already live and like go move there. Even if all you do is like go find an entry-level job, like sacking groceries or something like that, like go find a way to plug yourself into a richer community of people who are actually working towards a more valuable aim, which is like their own professional development, their own intellectual development, independent of the fact that they're enrolled somewhere. That's a better experience, I think. And I think that at the root of people's hesitance to not go to college, it's all of that. It's missing out on all that bundled stuff that is not what you pay for. I think that's the biggest pushback. And I think that parents too, especially parents who they didn't go to college 30 years ago because they didn't have the opportunity to, whether they couldn't afford to, or maybe that just like wasn't in the cards in their situation. I think a lot of parents feel entitled to provide that opportunity to their kids. And I don't blame them. That they grew up in a world where that was a calculated sure bet. And the fact of the matter is it's not a calculated sure bet anymore. And I don't think parents, even the parents who get that intellectually, I think it's still such a deep-seated fear. Like they don't want their kids to miss out on that because they missed out on it, and they want to be able to provide. And my heart goes out to them. Like this is like a deep thing that's like 50 years of social programming that you're fighting back. And like, I think that, when I talk to parents all the time, this is evident, and it's been evident, as I've gotten older and talked to my parents, and now I'm about to be a parent and thought about it, is like, you're always kind of thinking about like, how can I give my kids a better life than what I had? And that's what parents want to do. And so when they're hesitant to encourage their kids to step outside of the boundaries, it's not necessarily because they don't want to give their kids permission to go try something different. I think it comes from this place of like security and like desire to give their kids the best life possible. And it's well-meaning. They love their kids. They want what's best for them. And they're like, I still think there's a good chance that like college is probably the best thing, even if you don't get hired in a career path that you study, like your declared major. Like, I still think that there's something about that you're going to be better off if you go get that experience. And I think a lot of parents have realized now that there are really cool, great, in no way, shape, or form inferior options. There are far superior options outside of that, but it still takes a lot of education, both for parents and young adults. It takes a lot of due diligence. And I think it also takes somewhat of a critical assessment of like what you believe college is as opposed to what it actually is. And like understanding the financial aspect of that too, of like, maybe you still want your kid to have a great experience and you still want to be able to go to college. But like, if that means that you as parents or you as a young adult or you all co-signing a loan together means that you have to take out $200,000 of student debt. Like, I think you have to have a serious conversation about like this thing that we want, whether it's a degree or it's all the other package stuff. If that's really what you want, do it in the most effective way possible. Don't do it in a way that comes with all the baggage of student debt or all of the baggage of student debt paired with like 4 years of delayed life work experience, developing skills, developing independence, and all of that stuff. Like, there are still effective ways to do college without mortgaging your entire future. If that's truly what you're after, is like all that other stuff and getting a degree. Like,
but you can also replace so much of it, to your point about the bundle of goods that college provides, especially in the past few years, as we've like really learned how to navigate the internet and how to utilize it and how to ask it the right questions, but also like harness it to build the types of social infrastructures that we want. Like all of the things, like the ability to find mentors and the ability to find networks of people who share your interests and meet friends who have the same weird, quirky, niche questions that they're trying to answer that you didn't know anybody in your town when you were in high school who was interested in them and you thought you had to go to college to find them. Like, you can find those things on the internet so much more easily than you could have even 5 years ago. And that, like, there's a real acceleration there of people building things and options emerging. And I think it's going to become a lot more obvious to people that these alternative ways of accessing this stuff exists, and often it's free, which is a much nicer price tag than like $30,000 to $50,000 a year to go to a good school. I'm really curious about the COVID aspect though, because I've had a lot of conversations with people about K through 12 education and how much that's shifted since COVID, because everybody brought school home and people were like, wait a second, this is what you're doing in school all day? I'm not actually so sure about this. And also it really normalized the idea of kids not being in a classroom all day. Like, people thought homeschooling sounded terrifying. And then they had their kids at home because they had to. And they're like, wait a second, this is more normal feeling than I thought it was going to be. And the number of kids not in public school anymore is just still skyrocketing, even though the schools are open again. I'm really curious how the conversations that you've been having have changed since COVID around higher education too. You alluded to the fact that it's similar. What are some of the things you've noticed?
Yeah, well, it's definitely similar to sort of the revelation that I think has happened in the K through 12 levels. And I think that, you'll see the homeschooling shift. You're in this world every day. Like, parents are like, oh my gosh, this is what my kids are learning. I think the part that's different, like, parents had a revelation. I don't think it was so much curriculum focused. There may have been parts of that, but I think the real realization was when you take away all the other stuff that people want from a college experience, and you're left with just the worst part. And it's done in an inferior way online because it wasn't designed to be online. And now you've got kids they're taking this massive financial risk, whether it's their parents paying out of pocket or they're taking on debt. Suddenly they're like, this is not worth it. This is not what I felt like when I was doing the calculus in my head. And like, even if you understood the financial commitment you were making, you were like, this is not what I was paying for. And I think that that's what parents saw firsthand is like, oh my goodness, so much like this is not what I want for my kids. This is not the experience I want for my kids. Especially many colleges raised their prices and were delivering an inferior product at that point. And I pissed a lot of people off, parents, young adults in particular. I think I would say over the past probably 6 months, I've started to see like a little bit of a regression to the mean, like a return to normalcy there, where most campuses have gone back online. And so students are getting all that other stuff that they're actually paying for, even if they say that they're paying for the degree and the education. And so that's restored some confidence in the product of college education, is that, you're still getting the experience and all that other stuff. But I mean, it still has had lingering effects, especially for families that have multiple kids and they had like one kid that was graduating high school or in college and during COVID, and now they've got younger siblings that are now thinking about it. I know that it's led many parents to rethink whether it's worth it altogether, because they're like, I've now seen that so much of this has nothing to do with the education. And at this price tag, like, can there be something better that's more affordable and more productive? Because like the education part is just such a small part of why people make that decision. And I think that this is the first time as like a Scooby-Doo episode at the end where they pulled the mask off and everybody's like, what? It's not the education. It's the all the other stuff. And I think that it's hard to unsee that once you realize that it's not just the degree.
Oh, I want to ask you about homeschoolers for a second too, because I get a lot of questions from parents who are thinking about homeschooling or they're newly homeschooling, and they're sold on the whole K through 12 education component, or at least like K through middle school being superior, but they're really worried about long-term outcomes. And you get a lot of homeschool applicants at Praxis. What the percentage is of homeschoolers versus traditional schoolers in the program, or like a rough estimate of what that looks like?
If I had to guess, I'd say it's at least 50%.
Are there noticeable differences between the homeschoolers and the traditional schoolers? Like, you're getting high-level public schoolers too, but are there trends you've seen?
Yeah, so I'll say at the applicant level, maybe not like there's an admissions process for a reason. We're measuring for, high character, high curiosity, high initiative, high work ethic. And so like, quality is very high in the program. But like at the applicant level, where you're seeing people who are like passively applying to Praxis as if it's just one other option among the many sets of options, like the same way they're probably blasting out like 50 different applications to colleges, and they're just kind of like, whatever. I think that you see that even in some homeschools, like it's not probably as prevalent, because the big distinction I think between the average homeschool young adult and the average public school adult is there's so much more intention. And I think that it's the intention that's probably embedded in the parents' decision to homeschool, is that it's not just values based. A lot of it is values based in many cases, but it's also that it's like, we're going to be very deliberate about how we go about helping you learn the things that you want to learn or explore the things that you want to learn. Whereas I feel like not just public education, but like the schools, traditional school system in general is a much more passive approach to thinking about your life and education and career. It truly does. I use the phrase conveyor belt all the time. And I know that like Praxis has been using that terminology for a long time. And it's kind of true. It's sort of this conveyor belt where, one grade leads to the next, and the next grade leads to the next, and then it leads to college, and then it spits you out. And like, it's all this like very linear progression. But I think the average homeschool young adult and this will probably change over the next decade as like more people who weren't traditionally homeschooling have just resorted to that. But like, I think that the early adopters, people that have been home educating for a long time, it's been because they're like, I want my kid to be able to pursue the things they're interested in. I don't want to crush their curiosity. I want them to have this superior life because they don't feel like, their light was snuffed out as a young kid. And that's the thing that's why I love working with homeschoolers so much in particular, and unschooled, and like all varieties of alternative education is just, I think the incident rate of young adults who are very, very mature in how they're thinking about how they spend their time and how they spend their lives and what pursuits they're aiming for is very, very high, as opposed to traditional school system where a lot of the people who still are highly ambitious or highly curious, the way that they project that is typically like academically oriented. And so they're aiming for college because they're succeeding in that domain. They're ambitious, but they know that they have to be ambitious along a very particular set of lines. And like the other kids in public school, they sort of like, if you're an ambitious kid, but you don't like school, and you get like D's and C's and F's, you're like labeled the trouble kid. And your confidence is probably lower, even if you're really good at something else. And it's hard to go out into the world with a really high level of confidence in your own identity and your ability to do that. And that's one of the things that I think is really contrast when you talk about the average like 18-year-old homeschooler or unschooler compared to like the person who's graduating traditional school systems. It's just like the sense of identity seems to be a lot stronger in people who have been given the freedom and permission to go explore those things on their own.
Yeah, well, the self, there are far fewer pulls away from self when you're homeschooling, at least in my experience growing up homeschooled. Like, I don't think I would be the same person if I had gone to public school, because I would have had more pressure from my peers on a daily basis. Like, I had friends and stuff, but it wasn't like I wasn't in a classroom with them 7 hours a day, trying to conform to be like them if I wanted to have friends because I needed to get along with them somehow. I didn't have all of these authoritative structures that were trying to impose their will on me. I didn't have like the implicit assumptions of the system as a whole imposing a structure on me. Like, there were fewer external cooks in the kitchen, which can be a bad thing too. Like, it's not a good thing across the board, but in the experience that I had and many of the homeschoolers that I interact with have, it's a positive thing because the essence of you and what you're interested in and what you care about and what you want to be is less diluted than it is if you go through this like 12 plus year conveyor belt system of like, that's like, that is truly designed to make you conform enough that you can fit into society in a useful way and be relatively useful and like contribute to society and support yourself and your family. There's just like less, like, you just become less fragmented over the course of your education. And so I think your sense of self is so much stronger coming out of it. And I think that correlates very positively to your ability to design a career and be effective and do good work, because you have a better sense of what you want and you have a better sense of what you like and what you're good at.
And I think that maybe that's another way to think about it too, is like mimetic desire as the driving force of someone's life seems to be less prevalent among homeschoolers or unschoolers or people who had a self-directed education experience than like people who are coming out of high school. Like, I know that was super strong for me coming out of high school, is like, there's this certain scoreboard that they've told me that's how you win. And so that's what you're aiming for. And you're measuring yourself along the path to that attainment along that dimension compared to other people. And you're like, I'm good because I'm better than these people, but I'm not great because these people are farther along than me. And I've got to like advance up that hierarchy in order to be successful. And then like you find yourself, and this is a realization for me once I got out in the real world. It's like that way of keeping score and like that being the driving force of your life is a losing game. there's always going to be somebody else. And I think it starts when you're young, like learning how to be not only content, but like learning how to let your own curiosities and potential be sort of that guiding force, as opposed to like just chasing after the other stuff because other people are doing it or other people say that it's good.
Yeah, kids are born with such an innate sense of what they are naturally interested in and what they naturally gravitate towards, what they want to do. And I'm curious to hear your pushback to this, actually, because it's something I'm thinking about a lot. I'm curious if this maps to your observation of reality. But I feel like most kids, when they're left to their own devices, I think this is part of why homeschoolers are very distinctive in their approach to the world compared to like your average traditional school kid. When you're left to your own devices, there's this sort of natural progression where your curiosity and your intellect and your interests develop over time. You become, your intellectual capacity expands. And at the same time, you're like going deeper and deeper down, following threads of interests that have often been consistent over the course of many years. Sometimes they're less obvious than others, like the cohesion of the thread. But like in my experience, I spent my K through 12 education pursuing all the things that were interesting to me. And often they weren't obviously linked, but watching the evolution now of my career as an adult, it's very clear to me that there are these patterns that have emerged where things that I was really interested in middle school are now like coming up again in my mid-20s. And what I learned in middle school set the foundation in a lot of ways for being able to recognize things coming back in my 20s. Like when I was 12, I started my first business. And my mom told me, "Oh, you're an entrepreneur now." And I had no idea what the word entrepreneur meant, but I thought it sounded cool. So I was like, sure. And then in my early 20s, I was working for other people. And I didn't think I ever was going to start a business of my own because I just didn't think I was, in my head, the interesting businesses were all tech startups. And I was pretty sure I was never going to have an idea for a tech product because I don't know anything about software. I'm a writer. It's not really my wheelhouse. But then like mid-20s, I start a business because I see it's like, wait a second, now there's an opportunity to do this. I see how like this is the natural progression of expanding the things I've been doing throughout my 20s. And it's like, it didn't feel like a foreign concept to me because when I was 12 years old, I was like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. This is kind of fun. I think maybe this is something that feels like an identity I can adopt again. Or writing, like I just wrote all the time when I was a kid because I thought it was fun. And then as an adult, like I make quite a bit of my income by writing. And so I feel like when you just let kids follow the things that they're curious about and you don't crush it too much with the weight of obligation and expectation until they have no room left to breathe, let alone do things that they want to do, like usually the path unfolds for them. Like you don't have to know exactly where you're going. You just have to trust the things that you're curious about. And in a lot of the people that I've talked to, that seems to be a consistent trend. Like it seems to be decent advice to tell people just follow the things that they're curious about and the path emerges over time. And I'm curious if that maps to your experience of reality and the people, because you worked with a lot of people too. I'm curious how well that translates.
Yeah. So I think it all comes down to, I mean, this is true of learning and career pursuits and starting a business or being an entrepreneur or whatever. Like it has to be play. There has to be an element of whatever you're doing. It's play for you. It's not a job. It's not something that you're forced to do that you're not interested in. And I think that this is true. I think back as like myself as a kid too. And like the things I was interested in, like I was a geeky kid. If I go back and look at the stuff I was interested in, that was like play for me. Like, but there were a lot of those things that were like me pursuing intellectual interests. And it was play. And I think that when you get out into the real world, this is where it becomes much higher stakes. If what you're doing, there's not an element of play to it for you. Especially like the higher up the food chain you get, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're working as an employee or whatever, it's very, very hard to be the best at something that you do not care about. It's very hard to outcompete somebody who what they're doing, it's play for them. You're never going to outcompete that person because it's a part of their soul. It's a part of who they are. It's something that they could do all day and they're not going to get burnt out because they just love it. If you're trying to compete in a world, doing something that is not something you're just naturally inclined to do, you're going to get burnt out. There's limitations to like how far down, how much of your life and soul you can devote to something that it's not intended to be, devoted towards. And I think that that's become much more prevalent for me in my own experience too, is like trying to, even in like what I spend my day to day, what I focus on within the business and the things that I pursue outside of the business is like, it's so much more fun when you're pursuing things because you're interested in them and they're fun. And it's like, it's a reward and end unto itself, as opposed to like the ends to some other mean. And I think that that's how a lot of people approach their career and education is, I don't know what I want, so I'm going to go to college because I think that's the safest bet to help me figure out, or at least ensure high likelihood that I do have what I think I want, which is a secure job, make good money, the American dream, or whatever other stated goal when you lack clarity. And I think that when people get into, they get into their careers too, they have that same sort of wrong presupposition that it's like, well, I'll pursue this job because it's an income and then I can do whatever I want outside of my job. Or if I'm just successful enough, once I reach a certain level, then I'll be able to do all the other stuff that I want. And then it turns out like all the other stuff you want, you never have time for it or you never prioritize it. Unless you're very, very intentional about continuing to develop those interests or pursue those things on the side. Like, I don't think, I think you can be wildly happy and successful and fulfilled being an employee or an entrepreneur or some other version of that. But I think the important parts are like prioritizing the things that really matter to you and cultivating your interests very deeply. You don't have to make a ton of money to live a wildly happy, fulfilled life, but you have to reach deep across those dimensions that really matter to you. Maybe that's your family. Maybe that's community involvement. Maybe it's mentorship. Maybe it's, writing or creating art or music or something else. It doesn't have to be along the professional dimensions only, like your career or a job or something like that. There's so many different dimensions that you can focus on mastering and games that you can focus on winning. I think that anytime you find yourself down a path where you realize, hey, this isn't fun for me, like you need to start formulating an escape plan or some way to like temper that aspect of your life with like other things that are play for you. Like, and this has happened at different points in my own career. I felt like that's what burnout is. It's like an early warning system for ourselves of like, hey, this isn't fun anymore. We need to reposition ourselves, plant ourselves in new soil. And I think that a lot of people, they don't appreciate that sort of natural response that they have. And I think you see this in education too, like students not enjoying school, so they don't apply themselves. You see it a ton in college. People are like, yeah, I hate it, but I've only got 2 more years left. And like, they're not paying attention to sort of, they're unhappy. And it's like, go find something that does light your fire, that you would go find something that you're willing to go all in on because it's that important to you. And it's like play for you. And I think that the more and more that people sort of orient their lives and careers around those things that do feel like play, not because it's just all supposed to be fun, but it's play because it's something that is like, it's a part of you. It's something that like, that's a clue to you finding your thing, to finding that sort of perfect Venn diagram overlap of like what you're good at, what other people value, what you're actually passionate about. That's like sort of where all the best stuff in life is, I think, is where it's like play for you and you could do it all day because it's an end unto itself.
If people want to find more of your work or more about what you're building and doing, where would you send them?
Yeah, discoverpraxis.com. Learn all you want about Praxis, but we also have a newsletter, the playbook twice per week, regular content about education, career, personal finance for young adults, young professionals, and a lot of other podcast content, a ton of content that's around a lot of the ideas we've talked about today on a regular basis.
I will attest that the newsletter is fantastic. I will give it my full endorsement. It's pretty great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was a really fun conversation.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. Very, very happy to have this conversation. It's a good time. Also excited to see what you're continuing to build over at rebelEducator.
Same to you guys.